Hello and welcome to episode 154 of the Juicebox Podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by Dexcom. To find out more about the Dexcom G5, you can go to dexcom.com/juicebox. The episode is also sponsored by Omnipod. To try a free, no-obligation demo pod today, go to myomnipod.com/juicebox. This is the one you've been waiting for. Shacey Petrovic is back, the COO of Insulet, of Omnipod, of your favorite tubeless insulin pump. Shacey's going to update us on all kinds of stuff, including the imminent release of the new Dash PDM. Huge thanks to all of you who sent in questions through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and email. Really should consolidate that somehow, but you guys sent in a bunch of questions for Shacey, and I think I got through all of them. Please remember that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making changes to your medical plan.
Hi, this is Shacey.
Shacey, hi, it's Scott. How are you?
Hi, Scott. Good. How are you?
Good, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah.
Cool.
Can you hear me?
I'm very good. I can hear you fine. I understand we're both on a tight schedule today, so that's handy for both of us. Let me jump right in so we don't waste time, because I know we're going to talk about a lot. And I'm going to say one thing that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. I think that your visits on the podcast are really being heard by people because not as many people are calling you Stacey online anymore.
That is progress.
I really think we're making progress here.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for helping me correct the misunderstanding in the marketplace.
I just noticed it recently. I was like, I used to just say, "Hey, I'm going to be speaking with Shacey Petrovic, blah blah," whole thing, and then people would say, "Can you please ask Stacey? Can you please ask Stacey?" It's happening much less now, so you're definitely getting your repetition in. So where should we start? How about with the new Dash PDM? Can you tell me a little bit about that, how the FDA submission's going, and what we should expect as far as timelines and other details?
Yeah, terrific. We're really excited about Dash. This has been a program in the works for a couple of years now, and the whole idea with Dash is to move to leveraging mobile technology in order to drive value for our customer base. So we are modernizing the PDM, and that actually the PDM will be a locked down cell phone, so have very much the experience of a cell phone in terms of touch screen, intuitive, modern interaction, a really great user interface, a ton of work being done there. And then it also moves the system to Bluetooth communication. And so both the PDM and the pod will communicate via Bluetooth. The great thing about that is it sort of unlocks all the data from the PDM and the pod so that we can start to really provide, some benefits to our users, things like apps, a secondary display app that we call Omnipod Display on a user's mobile phone, and then also what we call Omnipod View, which is a follower or viewer app for caregivers. So all of that was submitted to the FDA in January, and also as the platform kind of for our future innovations. And so we're now working with the FDA as they progress their review. The plan would be, if this goes like most submissions, that it would be approved sometime middle of the year. We would move into a limited market release and then move into full market release towards the end of the year.
Okay. And so that process isn't too tough, because I think we talked about it before, because this Android device it's not like you're the only ones in the world using them. They are the base of it is manufactured at pretty much at a high rate around the world.
Yeah, that's right. Millions of these. And so that offers huge benefits to our users. And, that was the trade-off. We talked about that in the context of, we will not have an integrated meter in the device any longer, right, because we're essentially moving to a consumer electronics device. And the huge benefit of that is that, millions of these are manufactured across the globe. So highly reliable, very modern, very much a device that a consumer expects in terms of the experience, and then gives us a lot of flexibility because it's software-based gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of how we can, over time, develop the user interface and really respond to user needs. The downside, of course, is the fact that we don't have a meter integrated into the device. We made that choice because more and more of our users are using CGM, and more and more of our users are dosing off their CGM, so we could sort of see where the market was going there. And Asensio was great in working with us to ensure that even though it's a separate device, it's highly integrated via Bluetooth. The experience is seamless in terms of that data feeding into our bolus calculator without any, just in an automated fashion. So we thought we could provide, all the benefits of a consumer device and offset with mobile technology some of the challenges of having a separate meter.
Well, I think you walked the tightrope really well because, I'll say that it's great that the meter's in the PDM. There's just one less thing to fumble for. But at the same time, I completely understand everything you just said, and I understand the need to be able to move forward with more flexibility, especially because what this means is if a smaller device comes out later, or you guys just want to change, it's a quick, easy change. I think the one concern that I hear amongst people is if I don't have a Dexcom or I'm not comfortable dosing from what my Dexcom says, I think people feel abandoned, but at the same time, I don't see it that way. So, and I get how they can feel like that. You know what I mean? But at the same time, it's not there. And I think a little bit of time will prove that out for them because in the end, I think the Android device you're going to provide plus the new meter is in form smaller than the PDM now, right? So you're carrying less stuff. It just, there's two pieces, I guess.
That's exactly right. And we did make the PDM smaller and sleeker, and the Asensio meter itself very small and sleek. So the case and the user experience overall with Bluetooth connectivity and the auto entry into the bolus calculator, very strong user experience. Mm-hmm. And so we were very thoughtful about it. We recognize that people appreciate the fact that they're integrated. And this will enable us to integrate with all sorts of, meters down the line. And that's the beauty of kind of also moving the data to the mobile phone is that depending on the sensor that people are using or the generation of Dexcom sensor that users are using, they will have that integrated experience on their mobile phone with data and not have to worry about the integration on the hardware.
I see somebody coming up really simply with a third-party small leather case that goes around the Android device and holds the meter, and I think that ends everybody's concern. You know what I mean? Because, and I get being when something's been the same way for so long. It was my first thought. I think I was somewhere with you guys, and I heard it for the first time maybe a year and a half ago, and I was like, oh God, don't do that. And then as I thought about as I thought about it more, I'm like, well, it only makes sense. You can't keep if you keep combining this medical device with this electronic thing, there's just going to be too many speed bumps along the way.
Well, it's funny, too, because when you do market research, it is just funny. We are obviously trying to please as many people as possible with our innovations. And you talk to the existing user base that uses about 80% of our user base actually uses the integrated meter, and they like it. Then you talk to new customers, and they don't actually always like the idea of having to, rely on one meter and not have that choice. And so, it's just an interesting thing as you look across people, and what we definitely see the trend that over the last few years, the BGM choice has become less and less important of a factor in the decision making as people kind of get more technologies around, CGM available to them.
Yeah, I think that as long as people understand that, because I think Dexcom is still, it's interesting how you guys get kind of paired together in people's minds. I think of that as a good thing because I think you're the most kind of forward-thinking companies in both areas. And so, but at the same time, you'll see people talk about it all the time, hey, but will my Omnipod thing show my Dexcom stuff? And I'm like, does your car show what your TV's watching? It's it's an interesting, people melded together in their head because they used them together. Yeah. But at the same time, what I'm hearing is, if I'm right, I'm going to test my blood sugar with this new meter. And Bluetooth, it's going to go right into the PDM anyway. So that's the information goes right in there. If I don't need insulin, I don't actually ever have to pull the Android device out, do I? I could just, if I test my blood sugar and it's 100, I just go, oh, okay, and I put it away and I'm done. Right.
That's exactly right.
And I can see my blood sugar on my phone. I don't have to have the PDM to see my blood sugar or my insulin on board or stuff like that. Is that right?
That's right, as well, yeah. So we have those two apps that I talked about. As a user, you'll have Omnipod Display, and Omnipod Display will show virtually all of your PDM data on your phone in a secondary display app. So you can just click on your app, and it'll show you last bolus, insulin on board, kind of all of the key stats that you have on your PDM. And that same information will be available in what we call our Omnipod View app. And so the View app is essentially the follower app, and that will enable caregivers to view a Podder's key data remotely. And the content is pretty much the same, last bolus, insulin on board, dashboard, history, all of that stuff will be available on the mobile phone.
Okay. And in your mind, is there a path to one day the FDA saying you don't need this lockdown device, we'll let you bolus through your smartphone? Do you think it ever comes?
I do. I think it comes, and I don't think it's that far away.
Okay.
And we talked a little bit about this last time, Scott.
Yeah.
We've been in active discussions around this. It's the number one request that we get from our customers and our yet-to-be customers is people, especially now as we move to a mobile device, which people love because it's discreet. I mean, it is a cell phone-looking device. And it's a lockdown cell phone. The next question intuitively is, where do we go from here, and why can't I just use my cell phone? Now, it's a more complex issue. I think we talked about that too. If you think about all of the use cases that you're designing for. So, what happens when you're giving yourself a bolus and you get a telephone call? Or or you download some app and it interferes with the product or the performance of the insulin delivery app.
Right.
All of those things are security questions and behavior questions that we need to answer for the FDA. And we've got a pretty significant effort underway trying to do that.
That's cool. I would imagine. Are the cell phone companies involved in those conversations too, like Apple and Android? Do they get involved in that part of it or no?
They do. If you think about it, the way that the FDA works, if we wanted to try to get a phone control app out there, we would probably start with one phone or one group of phones because you really need a deep development effort. And so you would probably do that in conjunction with a phone company.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, but your apps that are going to come out to work in conjunction with Dash, hopefully by the end of the year around, they'll be Android and Apple available right away.
They're display, and so the first ones to come will be Apple, iOS. Just the development pathway is a little bit faster for them, but we're already underway on the development tied to Android as well. So those will come as sort of fast followers to the iOS apps.
Cool. Okay, great. Do you want to move on to Medicare? Because as much as I now think I understand it, I still don't think I understand it that much. I think I understand that something great happened on the political side. Yeah. Okay, Shacey will be back in just a second to talk about Medicare, Horizon Artificial Pancreas, address all the questions that you guys sent to me, which are too numerous to mention here. We're also going to talk about the growth of Omnipod as far as their manufacturing goes and globally. That's right, Australia. I asked about you. But first, let's talk about the Dexcom G5 continuous glucose monitor. Actually, I think Dexcom's going to be back on the show pretty soon too, but that's neither here nor there at the moment. I had a very interesting experience this weekend when I spoke at a JDRF event. I was standing in front of a room full of people explaining concepts that we talk about here on the podcast, like being bold with insulin and pre-bolusing and things like that. I could tell by people's faces how they were nodding along and the questions that they were asking that they were understanding. But then I put up graphs from Arden's Dexcom. And when I started pointing and saying, look, here, I pre-bolused here and this happened. The food went in here and here's how they reacted with each other. This is how I kept her blood sugar stable at 90 during a meal full of carbs. That was the moment. Man, did that just set off fireworks in people's heads. The data that you get back from the Dexcom CGM is the key to making great decisions with your type 1 diabetes. It's the key to understanding how to manipulate insulin. So we're talking, and then this one woman raises her hand and says, well, what do you do while your daughter's at school? And I said the exact same thing. She didn't understand. And that's when I was able to explain that Dexcom has a share and follow feature that's available for Android or Apple phones. When that young mother found out that she could see her child's blood sugar while they were out of the house, the look on her face was absolutely heartwarming. I hope you go to dexcom.com/juicebox to find out more. There are also links in your show notes and at juiceboxpodcast.com. Do you want to move on to Medicare?
we as a company have been working for, I would say, 3 years now on 4 key initiatives. And one is awareness around the product, making sure that people know it's a choice. The second was customer, and this is in no order, but customer experience. We felt like through product quality, through customer support, we had an opportunity to really drive improvements there and be best in class. The third is on innovation and, accelerating Dash to market and the rest of the product pipeline. And then the fourth was on access. And we just really understand how important access is to all of those things, to the customer experience, to whether or not we can afford to bring innovation to the market, and to awareness. Access plays a role in all of those things. And so for 3 years now, our CEO's top priority has been to get Medicare Part D. And everybody in the organization has been involved. Many people across the community, including all of our customer base. We had something like, 30 or 40,000 letters that came from Omnipod users to CMS and to Congress. Professional associations like ACE and Endo, JDRF, and other advocacy groups. Just a ton of people who helped us in accomplishing this, and who over the last 3 years have hung with us and really provided their advocacy on behalf of the community. So all of that resulted in a huge win in early January, where CMS issued guidance that clarified that Medicare Part D sponsors can now provide coverage for Omnipod. And by the way, not just Omnipod, but other technologies that deliver insulin into the body. So this is a broad win. They clarified specifically Omnipod, but it's actually a win for multiple technologies for the community. It's interesting, I think, and maybe not intuitive to the community, because we were approved under Part D, which is the drug benefit, as opposed to Part B or DME, which is where all the other insulin pumps are approved. We sort of saw it going this way, and so we're really excited about what this could mean for the customer experience, and I can talk a little bit about that. But I think that's why the community was left thinking, okay, do I have access today, and do I have access like I do with other insulin pumps? And the answer to both of those questions is not quite. So it's huge news because, of the 1.5 million people that live with type 1 diabetes in the United States, almost a third of them have either Medicare or Medicaid coverage. And this decision gives them a pathway to access. But we've got a lot of work to do between now and really the fall to make sure that we can get broad access to all of these individuals. So what we'll do now, so we've got this guidance. Now what our job is to go to, there's roughly a dozen Plan D sponsors. So these are insurance plans and providers that basically provide care and coverage to Medicare beneficiaries. Something like 9 of them cover 80 or 90% of the 45 million patients that are covered through Medicare. We'll go to each of them and negotiate access and pricing so that starting in 2019, all Medicare beneficiaries will have access to Omnipod. And that's the work that's already underway. Our team is off and running with that and making good progress.
That process does not sound fun at all. It really doesn't. Does this make it possible for people to one day go into a pharmacy and get their Omnipods?
That is the goal. Now CMS has clearly designated us a pharmacy product. We've got today maybe 10 to 15% of our business going through the pharmacy channel. And what we hear from our users and from their clinicians is that the experience is just much easier. So in many cases, it's a physician writing an e-prescription. You don't have the prior authorization process. You don't have the vendors involved like you do on the DME side.
Yeah.
The turnaround time is typically, a fraction of what it is on the DME side for a patient who's interested to actually get the product. And so the experience is much, much better, both for the clinic as well as for the user, for the patient. And so we're hopeful that we can bring those same benefits now to a broader group of our customers now that we've got this official designation, and to Medicare and Medicaid beneficiaries. But the vision is that, a physician would write an e-prescription and the patient would go to the pharmacy and pick up their pods where they pick up their insulin and the rest of their supplies. And you don't have to deal with, intermediaries and other more burdensome processes.
Would that open up that processing process for people who aren't on Medicaid or Medicare, or would it just be for them?
Yeah. No, it would be for Medicare, Medicaid, and commercial patients as we get more and more pharmacy access. But the reason why we sort of link Medicaid and Medicare is that once you have CMS guidance for Medicare, most Medicaid plans sort of follow the lead on CMS guidance. And so our team is now going to all of these Medicare plan providers. We're also in the process of going to all the Medicaid plans and educating them on CMS's guidance and then doing that pull through at the Medicaid level as well. So we're going to make good progress this year on both fronts, but probably the big broadening of access occurs in 2019.
Well, I can think of a company that I have to talk to frequently to get my Omnipods from that I'm very excited never to speak to again. So that's great. I mean, they're a horror.
You're not the first person to say that to me, and that's one of the things that we have prioritized the customer experience at Insulet, and so we've invested a lot in improving customer care, in staffing at larger levels, and in trying to make the customer experience across the board improved. And a big piece of that is access. How do you get your products? What sort of burdens do you have to go through on a monthly or annual basis to do that? And pharmacy, for us, at least in the early stages, has demonstrated a really improved experience there.
No, I think I would completely agree with that. And I also think it's nice for you to get to explain it, because it feels like when you're at home and you see something on your line, oh, look, they said okay to this. That's pretty much what you hear. And then, it doesn't happen for a year and a half and you think, well, nobody cares, but there's a process in place that needs to be followed. Yeah. That takes head count, it takes effort, it takes a lot, to make this happen.
That's right.
Just briefly, if you go to myomnipod.com/juicebox, you can get a free, no obligation demo pod. Omnipod will send you out a non-functioning pod, but you can still adhere it to yourself and see what it's like to wear it and get a real feel for the form and the fit and the comfort. And then from there, if you're happy with it, you contact them back and they can help you get the process going. That's it. No big ad. myomnipod.com/juicebox. You can always find those links in your show notes or at juiceboxpodcast.com. And in these notes for this episode, there's also going to be links to clinical trials with Omnipod if you want to try to get on their Horizon artificial pancreas trial. There's phone numbers for those of you who are current customers who want to keep Medicare going. There's going to be a lot in the show notes this week, so make sure you take a look. All right, that's it. Back to Shacey.
That's right, and we've sort of made those investments ahead of time, so we're already off and running. I think we've actually had discussions with every Part D plan sponsor now, so we're already in the negotiation process. Mm-hmm. We've also staffed up a hotline and a group within our customer care function to help customers go through the Part D exception process. And so Natalie can provide that information to you if you wanted to put it in your call notes or whatever makes sense. But for people who this year are going to age off into Medicare, we should be able to get them continuity of care while we work through, getting established coverage and access on all these plan sponsors. And for new patients that are coming on that are 65, with the anticipation of this changing in 19, we should also be able to help them. So we've got a team of people that are simply just walking those types of people through the exception process, and we've had good success with that so far.
That just honestly gave me chills. That's really exciting that you guys are going to put the effort into doing that. Thank you. That's really cool. Okay, so Speaking of what it takes to ramp up to do more, I joke about this every time you're on. There was a moment a number of years ago where I started thinking like, oh, Omnipod's just going to go away. And then a whole new group of people came in, and now I think, wow, they are on fire.
Yeah. So
not only are you building a new facility in Mass, but you're expanding in the rest of the world. I'm in Europe, and I'm hoping other places, because when we get to our questions at the end from listeners, there are a lot of people asking for Omnipod, not just in America.
I noticed that. So you have a global audience, Scott. Fantastic.
I have to tell you that some days I look at the map and I think, why are people listening there? I don't speak that language even close. But yeah, it is really, the internet is, it's everywhere, as you know, Shacey. So it works pretty quickly. But it's, so when I started hearing back, Canadians, I'm always used to Canadians being like, please stop forgetting us, because that's, I think, how they feel. But now, I guess growth is good because more people around the world are talking about Omnipod. So what are you doing internationally right now, and what's timelines for stuff like that?
Well, it's fantastic. We just we annually update for the investment community our user base, and we just announced that we finished 2017 between 140 and 145,000 active users. That's a 30% year-over-year increase in the installed base. So just tremendous growth, which is why we're making these investments in U.S. manufacturing and in the international expansion. Actually, Canada was our first step into becoming a global company. So just about 2 years ago now, we acquired the distribution back from GSK in the Canadian market, and that has been hugely successful for us. And so we've seen tremendous growth there. We've built a really strong team there. The customer satisfaction scores are very high, and it's just been a tremendous win for us. And so that's when we started to think about, that was successful. It was a bit of a pilot. Mm-hmm. And how do we really establish the global footprint that we want to? How do we not depend on distributors to deliver the customer experience, deliver innovation to the market, and determine when and how we enter into new markets? And so we made the decision now almost a year ago to go direct in our European markets. And so that will happen on July 1st of this year. We're transitioning our European customers to Insulet from the existing distributor, who is Ypsomed. This is actually a big undertaking because there's anticipated to be somewhere between 50 and 60,000 customers that will be transitioning from Ypsomed to Insulet. Wow. We've had people on the ground now for quite a while. We've got a growing team there. We've got our European headquarters established, and we now have entities across the market in all the markets in which we compete. So really exciting progress. Last week, we were in Vienna, or I guess the week before last, in Vienna for ATTD, which was our first time exhibiting at a European conference as Insulet, as opposed to as Ypsomed. Mm-hmm. And so really making great progress there. July 1st, we will have, actually at that time, we're estimated to have somewhere around 65,000 users, and they will become Omnipod Insulet customers. And so really, really excited about that. What that does, one, is turn us into a global company. By the end of 2018, I think, we'll be virtually half and half in terms of how many customers exist internationally versus how many customers exist in the U.S.
Excellent.
And so a lot of our time and energy in Insulet is spent on, how do we really make sure that we've got innovation plans that contemplate the global market needs. How do we make sure that we're setting up for success across access, awareness, et cetera, depending on the unique market needs of these international markets across Europe, Canada, and other markets. And then the great thing about this is it also allows us to enter into new markets when we want to. And so there are a ton of markets, like you mentioned, Australia, that we know want Omnipod, and we haven't been able to move forward in those markets because of our relationship with Ypsomed. So this now unlocks our capability in doing that as well, and we're looking very hard at new markets in Australia, New Zealand, looking at new markets across Europe. I think, candidly, I think that's going to be a 19 event. Mm-hmm. Or maybe sometime towards the end of 2018, because we've just got a lot of work to do to make sure that we transition this business successfully and ensure continuity of care for all of the fast-growing European markets, and then we'll start to get to work on new market entries.
Well, again, you're moving quickly because you had to dissolve that relationship with Ypsomed to even make these moves. So, yep. And that didn't happen that long ago. So that, I think it's good. So Australia has got to hold on a little longer. And
a little longer. Yeah.
And listen, these here's what I just learned from what you told me about these numbers. I don't charge enough for the ads on the podcast. That's what I just figured out. So I didn't hear the rest of it, Shacey, but I heard that. So no, I'm kidding.
You are good.
So, well, that is really, that is genuinely exciting. You sent one of my favorite British people out of the country, and he's now in England working hard on
Dom.
Yeah, Dom's gone.
Yeah. He had his first child in the UK, actually.
So your business model changed his kid's nationality, basically.
Nationality, citizenship, that's right.
Look what you just did. Your citizenship was, the baby citizenship.
We are truly global now, yeah.
You're just trying to build a employee around the world, that's all. That's excellent. That's well.
That's right.
Congratulations. No one knows Dom, but trust me, Dom saved me one time at a dinner meeting when I was being myself and the other people were like, I don't get why we're involved with this guy. And Dom was like, I think he's funny. And I was like, thank God. That's excellent. So yeah, I want to talk a little bit about what you guys are doing, because, companies don't often build their own merchandise. And so to me, it sounds like an incredible confidence on the company's part to build a manufacturing facility. And you're going to fold your headquarters in, like, this is all going to happen in one place at some point? Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that whole thing's going to be together?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, and in fact, so it's a massive investment, you're right, and it's certainly a signal to how confident we are. We're investing probably close to $200 million in Acton in acquisition of the site, all of the building and customization of the site, and then in the automated, it's really amazing, the innovation and highly automated manufacturing equipment that we are building. We've got some of the, just tremendously talented automation engineers that are working with our partner to create all that equipment. Mm-hmm. And I think, if we say as a company, I said, 4 things were important to us: access, awareness, customer experience, and innovation. If customer experience and innovation are truly important to us, then we need to manufacture our own products, and we need to have manufacturing close to R&D, because we're going to be launching a new product every year for the next 5 years. And you have to get great at technology transfer, process transfer, and the link between manufacturing and innovation. And so all of those things led us to say, hey, we really want to invest in the United States, close by, and we want to be able to manufacture our own products. This will enable us to, have automation around QC. Will enable us to have an innovation line so that we can get really good at transferring innovations from R&D to the facility. And we're doing all of this in Acton, Massachusetts. So that's where our new plant will be. It's about, maybe 15 miles from where we are today. And the facility is enormous and really is being designed for our needs. And so we'll have a lot of flexibility for growth on the manufacturing side. And we'll be moving all of our functions over there between now and really the beginning of 2019. And we plan to be up and running in manufacturing at the beginning of 2019. And we're on track to do that. It's a really exciting move for us. I don't think there's a lot of companies, frankly, a lot of U.S. companies that are creating manufacturing jobs in the United States. Yeah. So it's really exciting to be able to make that investment and create jobs right here in Massachusetts. But I think it's even more exciting what this could mean for our ability to deliver innovation to the market more quickly, and what it can mean in terms of the customer experience because of quality and reliability and cost of the product out of our U.S. plant.
It just makes sense that, if your R&D has an idea about, anything, changing the form factor of the pod or anything that happens on the inside of it, you're taking out a full step of having to go then to the people who tool those machines and make the products. And it just sounds like it's obviously more efficient. I'm also thinking, on the business side, did Acton offer to rename the town Insulet when you decided to put the building there?
I got to tell you, they were so supportive. I mean, really, Acton, Massachusetts Governor Baker, Charlie Baker, and his Life Sciences Commission, they just were terrific in terms of helping us find the location, in terms of making sure that we had the right structure and incentives in place to make that investment. And the town could not be more welcoming. I mean, even my husband and I have been out to dinner a couple times in Acton where people find out that we work for Insulet and they come over and bring free appetizers or free desserts. I mean, it's just that people are really excited. Yeah. And I think it's a great story because, they're excited obviously for the jobs and the investment, but they're also excited to be associated with the story of Insulet and the fact that we actually make a difference in people's lives, that we're working to ease the burden associated with this disease. Everybody knows of diabetes. They may not know the specifics, but usually their life is touched by diabetes. So to have kind of that kind of story and that kind of mission in their backyard, and people are really excited about it. So it's been just a ton of fun getting to know the town and watching our facility go up before our very eyes. I just toured it a couple of weeks ago, and it's really coming together nicely.
Put in a nice conference room, and we'll bring the podcast up there, do it live for the people in Boston.
Yeah, we'll have, you have to come because we're going to have sort of the manufacturing, a walk-around hallway with visibility to all the manufacturing. So you'll have to come and see the pods coming off the line once we're up and running in just actually about 6 months.
That's excellent. I just got a note today from someone who said, "How come you're not speaking in Boston this year?" And I said, "Well, I don't. Nobody invited me." And but I said because I'm doing it in a number of other places, and I always talk to Natalie. I'm like, we should just do it like there's plenty of people to come that want to come out and talk. So it'd be a great way to bring people from the community around to see the manufacturing too. But nevertheless, that's down the road. So you have, I'm going to admit to not understanding your pipeline correctly. Because it came out on a chart I feel like it's been a while now, and I looked at it, and back then I didn't understand the difference between Dash and Horizon, so I was confused there. And then there was other things happening, but I'd like you to sort of lay out how you think the timeline of your pipeline looks at the moment.
Sure.
Is that fair?
Yeah. So first to market, obviously this year will be Dash. And that will launch sometime in a limited market release, sometime in June or July. Really, that's pending FDA clearance, and then go into full market release 6 months following that. Then the next product to market will be Omnipod U500, and that's bound to hit the market sometime in 2019. And that's our partnership with Lilly to get their concentrated U500 approved out of Omnipod, and that will be based on the Dash platform. So all the benefits that you get with Dash, plus a very a user interface that's been very much tailored to the U500 user, and the ability to use that concentrated insulin out of the pod. So that will happen in 19. Sometime in 1920 will also come Horizon. So I'll set that aside because I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then 2020 will be U200, and U200 is twice the concentration. So U500 is 5 times the concentration of U100, and U200 is twice the concentration. Both of those products also have very unique, very cool user interfaces that have been designed specifically for a type 2 user, and in the case of U500, a U500 user. So, there's just different language used among those user groups. For example, insulin on board, insulin carb ratios, those are terms that are not necessarily widely used or understood among the average type 2 insulin-dependent patient. And so we have worked to kind of simplify the user interface and to use terminology and workflows that kind of fit, the needs of that segment. So that comes in 1920. Really excited because, in the United States, there's
Shacey,
just as many people.
I need to stop you for a second because you've done it twice and you're starting to confuse me. It's 1920 was a while ago. It's 2020.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
This is confusing. 2019 or 2020.
There we
Thank
go.
you.
No problem.
Yeah, so 2019 is U500, and then 2020 is U200. Okay. And those two products basically will help us meet the needs of people who live with type 2 insulin-dependent diabetes. They typically require higher volumes of insulin on daily doses. So rather than make the pod bigger or the reservoir bigger to give them more insulin, we have concentrated the insulin so that we can keep the form factor and actually still meet their needs with a 3-day pod change. So that's what comes in 2019 and 2020.
Can I ask a question about that? Do you see any type 1s taking advantage of that? Because I'm of the mindset that I would just rather change the pod more frequently. But some people aren't. Do you see some people using it for type 1 and
I do, particularly U200. U500 is kind of unique just in its onset to action, and it's actually one of Lilly's fastest growing molecules, but it's a smaller, more niche, user group that uses U500. U200 has a very similar onset of action, and I think will be used by people living with both type 1 and type 2.
Okay.
insulin-dependent diabetes. And so I think that you may see that, and so that's actually why the user interfaces are slightly different. So the U500 user interface is really designed really with just the type 2 user in mind. The U200 user interface is designed for both type 1 and type 2. So there's a slight difference there in terms of how the user interface is presented. So we do think that product will be used by both patients, both patient groups.
Cool. I have one quick question before we get to the listener questions. So you talked about a 30% increase this year in users. Do you have a forecast for next year that you can share, or is it not public?
Yeah, we forecasted a 20% increase in users this year. The difference there, the reason why it's slightly less, although still really incredible growth, is because in Europe our focus is on transitioning the base as opposed to growing it. So what we're forecasting is that our European customer base will remain relatively flat. Revenue goes up because we're going direct there, but we're just focused entirely on transitioning those existing customers as opposed to growing in 2018. And then the U.S. will continue to grow. Actually, growth accelerates according to our forecast in 2018 versus 2017. So really just another terrifically, exciting year for us ahead of us in 2018.
What's the most important pathway to growth? Is it relationships with insurance, or is it people understanding what the product is? Do you think one's more important than the other, or are they equally?
I think they're so intertwined, it's hard to separate them. Okay. Access to me for medical devices is just foundational for awareness. It's foundational for customer experience, and it's foundational for cost, and that's part of the customer experience. And so it's why it's been such a huge focus of ours. And it's certainly, as we've expanded access, we've established stronger commercial access. We've established, more Medicaid access, and now we're about to establish really broad Medicare and Medicaid access. I think that is going to help us accelerate significantly. So I think that's huge. And then awareness, we must be crossing a tipping point now in awareness. It's probably because of the Juicebox podcast I keep doing. Yeah.
I think so for sure. Well, no, it's just.
But I do think we're at a sort of inflection point for awareness. I can't remember who I was telling, but I was in Nashville for a weekend, and I went down to get coffee at the lobby of the hotel, and I was wearing a pretty nondescript black fleece with an Omnipod logo on it. And the guy giving me my coffee said, "Are you a Podder?" And I said, "No. I mean, I work for Insulet." Thank you for seeing our marketing. And he said he was a Podder. He was so excited about it. He bought my coffee for me. He was just like, "It's the best thing ever," Oh, that's great. And so those experiences didn't happen when I first started here at Insulet, and now it just seems like I regularly run into people who are familiar with or actually using Omnipod, which is great to see, because that just sort of compounds on itself once you really hit a certain threshold.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to hit you fast with these listener questions because we're down to 20 minutes. All right. We can do it, though.
Okay.
I think we've already, for Dash, we've already covered the launch time in the U.S., limited roll in June, hopefully everything by the end of the year, 2018. You talked a lot about the apps that will work on the users' phones and on caregivers' phones. So I think we understand that pretty well. Again, like I said, a lot of people intertwine these things when they're asking questions. Will my Dash information be able to show my Dexcom information? So can I see Dexcom on Dash or Dexcom on an app?
You will be able to see, you'll have integrated viewing of Dexcom data and Omnipod data via your mobile phone. So we actually made a conscious decision not to do hardware integration because of what we saw in the market. Mm-hmm. Pump companies were not keeping up with sensor innovation. So sometimes your pump wouldn't match up with your current G5 sensor, for example. And we also see in market research that our users oftentimes will go back and forth between different types of sensors or BGMs and sensors. And so we made the conscious decision to go to the mobile phone with our data so that you could integrate with whatever sensor you're using and integrate with whatever fitness data and other apps that you're using to help manage your your diabetes and your decisions around blood glucose. So what that means immediately with Dash is that if you have an iPhone, you'll be able to have your two widgets right next to each other. So you'll have a Dexcom widget and you'll have an Omnipod widget right on your phone. So you just click on your phone. You don't actually even have to go into an app, and you'll have your data available and visible right next to each other.
Perfect.
And then as we get further along in the development with other sensors, et cetera, and even more integrated viewing with Dexcom in terms of data overload, that's all goals for us. But when the product launches, you'll have that type of integration on your mobile phone. So not on the device, but on your mobile phone.
Very cool. And Insulin on Board is visible in the View app. We said yes to that, so that's good. Android, we understand, will come after Apple, but did you learn from Dexcom's trip up? So do you think you can make it happen faster than they did?
I think we can make it happen faster, yes. In fact, Natalie should be able to follow up with you. We probably even have some sort of forecast on that. I just don't know it off the top of my head.
Okay, so here comes the next question. Whenever you say you're going to transfer from one device to another one, something I've paid for already, and you want to give me another one, I saw the question so often, what's the pathway to obtain a new PDM? Or is it going to cost me any money? If I really need one, meaning mine's on last legs or I'm out of warranty, do I get any kind of, do I get to bump to the front of the line? How about that kind of stuff? Hey, I just wanted to jump in here and say, if you're new to the podcast and you just came in to hear from Shacey today, or you don't listen every week, but you come in every once in a while, please consider subscribing and trying out some more of the episodes. I think you would find a lot of great information that might be, pretty helpful in your living your day-to-day life with type 1 diabetes. Hearing people's stories, hearing about management ideas. It's good stuff. Let's say this too. We're 45 minutes in. We've got about 15 more minutes to go. If you're excited about what you're hearing from Shacey about where Omnipod is going, please visit myomnipod.com/juicebox to try their free no obligation demo pod. Get started today with Omnipod. What's the pathway to obtain a new PDM?
So there will be a pathway for everybody to obtain the new system. And we're very committed to making that pathway totally accessible. So I wish I could give you more insight than that, but at this point I can't yet. But as the product launches, it'll become abundantly clear. And our goal is really to have everybody have access to the PDM. And if you've paid for your existing PDM, we certainly don't want you to have to pay twice or pay more or anything like that. So we're working on all of those pathways. And as we launch, maybe as we get closer to launch, it would make sense for us to be back on this show really talking about, those opportunities. But we fully understand this is a concern, for our customers, and we're going to do the right thing.
There you go. I think I know one of the things you guys are hoping to do, and I wish I could say it out loud, but it's very cool. Hopefully you'll get to it. Me too. And so as we get closer, we'll be shouting it from the rooftops, hopefully on this podcast. Let's see. Will new pods be required? So if you have the new PDM, will I need, the question really is, I have a stockpile of pods at my house. Are they going to work with a new PDM?
And they won't, because the current communication is it's proprietary radio frequency communication, and this will move to Bluetooth. So there's actually Bluetooth going into the pod as well as the PDM. And so you won't be able to use your new PDM with your old pods and vice versa. Okay, so everybody who's got a zombie apocalypse pile of pods somewhere, start using them up and save on save. You don't have to buy any next time they're available. I think we've gone over why there's no BG meter in the PDM. There was a question about when you get under 50 units, why it only says 50 units. And so does the new PDM have the ability to show more specific measurements? The PDM, so as it relates to remaining insulin, it will operate the same way as the current system. So it still will go down to sort of thresholds like 50 plus and 50 less. It won't get more specific than that. I don't know, Scott, frankly, off the top of my head, why that decision was made, but I can certainly look into it.
It's got to be something to do with the technology it takes to make the measurement.
That would be my guess, too. I don't know what the technical feasibility is, and probably some concern over specific accuracy, wanting to make sure that whatever information we're providing is absolutly accurate.
I don't trust my car when it says I'm under 30 miles. I know I'm just getting gas right now. Let's see. So is there any way to authorize data shares with a healthcare provider? New PDM.
Yeah, actually, users can do that today through Insulet-provided Gluco. So today, if you use Gluco, which we provide to Omnipod users, you can authorize your clinic or your clinician or your physician to see that data. But you'll be able to do that with Dash, too. So our View app will enable you to share your data with up to 5 other people, so caregivers, school nurses, clinicians, whoever you decide that those 5 people are. So you will definitely be able to do that via Dash and the Omnipod View app, but you can actually do that today with Gluco. So.
For all the people who are hanging on to the things that they love most, is there a drop dead when your old PDM stops working, that there won't be another old PDM to replace it? Like if I don't want the Dash, which wasn't a lot of questions, but it was asked a couple of times. So if I don't want the Dash, how long am I going to be able to make do with the one I have until you just don't have them
we don't have plans right now to obsolete the existing platform, so we're not going to force everybody to convert quickly to Dash. That said, all of the market research would indicate that I think everybody's going to want to convert to Dash when they become familiar with the technology and all of its benefits. So we'll see how that goes, but we don't have plans right now to force the conversion at all.
Okay, and I can't even remember if we said this, so I'm just going to ask again. Timeline for when does the PDM happen in Canada?
So we're underway now. So we'll once we get FDA approval, we'll reference that approval for Health Canada. And there's a bit of development work that needs to happen around millimoles. So they use a different unit of measure in Canada, and so all of those things are kind of underway. But once we get FDA approval, we'll then submit for Health Canada clearance. FDA clearance. We'll then submit for Health Canada clearance, and then roll out our distribution plan from there. So sometime probably in early 19 would be my guess.
Okay. And then the thing we talked about earlier for Australia, you're not going to show up in Australia with old PDMs. So when you get that going, that'll start with Dash, I imagine.
I'm not sure about that because the original registration in Australia was tied to the original platform. So we're evaluating what it would take to update it or launch and then convert at some point. And there's a really growing demand there. So we want to do whatever route to market is going to happen faster. And as you might know, our medical director, Dr. Trang Lai, is Australian, and she literally asks me about this on a weekly basis, even from her maternity leave. And so we're very eager to get this done. She gets personal emails. All of us get, patient outreach and community outreach from Australia. And so we want to get there as quickly as we can. That might be with the current platform, and then we'd have to make a plan to convert to the new one.
I have a contingent of Australian listeners who are they are persistent. So. And we talked earlier about the reasons why you wouldn't integrate Dexcom with the device, and I think that's a leftover idea from years and years ago, where that was it's how people were thinking of it. Like these things are all just going to be together one day, and it's just what you said just made a lot of sense to me, because if you start combining things, then there's going to be countless iterations of your product, which makes it, I think, impossible to service. And then I just think that keeping them, the way you described keeping them apart, makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, and we want our users to be able to use whatever sensor they want to use, right? And so that could be a G5, that could be a G4, G6 when it comes, whatever they're currently using. And by doing software integration on your mobile phone, that ensures that you can use whatever sensor, whatever generation of sensor at whatever period of time that you want. So that's how we were thinking about it. That said, our Horizon program is very much a fully integrated product because we're going to be dosing off of it. It's a complete system. And so that is a completely integrated system. And I don't know if we touched on that in the development pipeline, but that's forecasted right now for the end of 19, early 20.
Yeah, we're going to try to talk about that at the very end. I was saving that for the end, Shacey. I want people to listen all the way through.
Okay, we'll come back to that.
So someone, I wish I had the person's name ask this question, because as soon as I saw this question, I thought, oh, I have thought this so many times, and I already know how you're going to answer it, so it's a little defeating to ask, but I want to say it anyway. I set up an extended bolus, let's say. I say I'm going to do 10 units, 40% now, and the rest over an hour. And 25 minutes into my extended bolus, I realize I need all of this insulin right now. At the moment, I have to cancel the extended bolus, look on the screen, see how much delivered, then do the math, and then create a new bolus. This one person, I wish I knew their name, said, why can't I just choose between cancel and deliver? And I thought, wow, that's genius. But you can't do that. So tell me why.
Well, you're right. We didn't do it. I don't know what the technical hurdles are, and I'm embarrassed to say that this is the first time I've heard that feedback, because it does make total sense to me. I understand what you're asking, but I know that Dash will operate similar to our current system in this way. The two things I will say, though, is number one, we've made every function a lot easier in Dash. So everything, creating a new bolus, canceling an extended bolus, et cetera, all of that takes a lot less time and a lot less taps. So that process should be easier. And we did add, I know that's key, that request was key for pediatric population, and we did add 2 new features to Dash specifically for our pediatric population. And the first is 0 basal, and then the other is IC ratios down to 1 and 1/10. And so I think, though, we did try to add functionality where we could specifically for the pediatric patient population. I'll put that one on the list and see if there's something that we can do about it for future generations.
Okay. And for people who don't want concentrated insulin, is there any way to make the Omnipod smaller but make it hold more insulin, Shacey? Do you have magic at Omnipod that you can use? If I can wave
a magic wand, exactly, I would love to. I mean, I think, first of all, I'll say that, there's always ongoing effort looking at optimizing the size of the pod. We know that people would want that to be, a Band-Aid or whatever, right. Whatever is very small and if possible. And so there's a ton of technology, though, in that little pod. And right now we feel like the space is very optimized, and we'll continue to work on making the footprint smaller, et cetera. But really there was no way to make the reservoir bigger and make the pod smaller, which is why we went down concentrated insulin, because we said, well, at least we can keep the same form factor that we know everybody loves, and we can give them effectively more insulin just by concentrating it. And so that's where we went. But I will say that we're always looking at how could we make the pod smaller over time. But making the pod smaller and making the reservoir bigger, that's a real challenge.
I thought this morning, as I did my daughter's pod change, by the way, in 30 seconds before she ran out the door for school. I wish people could see how easy it is once you really know how to do it. But as I stuck it on her, I really thought, I was thinking about our conversation come up in a couple hours, and I thought it is spectacular how much is inside of this thing, and yet as a human being, when I look at it, I think, why can't like it's sometimes you have to remember what you have is pretty good, I guess. So
well, and we do things like the drive mechanism for the auto insertion, that takes up space, and so the trade-off would be manual insertion to maybe reduce the space, but we know that all of our users love auto insertion. So those are the trade-offs that we're always contemplating as we think about future generations of, what the pod could look like and what the pod could be.
I'll give you an easy one for your R&D to talk about. The clicking that happens before the auto insertion, I bet people would love it if that didn't happen. I don't know if that's possible. I'm assuming that there's something ramping up inside of it, but I see my daughter's been using it for years and years and years, and she still can't stop herself from counting the clicks. So, and it doesn't always insert on the same amount of clicks. So when it goes in on the one she doesn't expect, she says words you wouldn't expect a 13-year-old to say just because it surprises her. Okay, it's always going to be a big question, I guess. There are, I guess, most of your users, I'm assuming, don't have issues with the adhesive, but the ones who do with any medical device have. Are you working on hypoallergenic versions of the adhesive?
Yeah, that's the other thing that we're always working on. That the adhesive is medical grade adhesive. It's always an ongoing battle, though, because. And if you look at, we evaluate all of our global complaint rates and then always look to have various life cycle engineering efforts to help address any of those and help make sure that we're always driving improvement in performance. And the thing with adhesive is the complaint rates are virtually the same for it's not sticky enough and or sensitivity. They're both very low, but I don't want to discount it because I know it's not a good user experience when it occurs.
Right.
And that's what any device that's on body, that's a wearable with adhesive is battling. Can you make it sticky enough, and yet can you not cause issues for people with sensitive skin? And there's a small group of people that are always going to have sensitivity towards adhesives, and so that's what we're balancing always. And there's an ongoing life cycle engineering effort looking at how do you optimize adhesives. We've been underway on that and made some good improvements actually tied to irritation and making sure that we reduce that down. But I think we'll continue that effort for a long time.
I'll tell you that, and I'll just mention this here. On the front of my blog is a blog post that I did not write. It's written by a mother of a child who had an incredible reaction to an adhesive, and she figured it out. It's an interesting process, but everyone who refers to that blog post loves it. I'll put a link in the show notes to it. It sucks. It sucks.
I don't think I've seen it, Scott, but I will definitely look at it and send it to our R&D group.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Let's see. Okay. What are you guys doing? Do you work on static? Which, when it gets super dry, some people have their Omnipods, I guess error, and we call it static. The best fix I've ever heard is duct tape, which is weird. So can you just put a piece of duct tape on the inside of the pod when you get done, or how does that work? I don't want to oversimplify.
Well, we don't have any data. We don't have any confirmed data on the effectiveness of duct tape. But we have had significant research and development effort focused here. And in fact, this season, we tested a solution that had really good results. We tested it in limited fashion, but I'm optimistic that next season we're going to see a different performance as it relates to ESD. As you said, this only hits us during cold, dry months. So typically it starts to ramp up in December and then it starts to ramp down in February. So we're on kind of the back end of the season, but I think we've made some really good progress there. And I think our team actually is on the forefront of understanding ESD and wearable devices. And we've just developed a tremendous amount of expertise here. So I think we've nailed it, but we'll see for sure next season.
Okay. And Shacey, you have to go to a board meeting in like 2 minutes. So I have two other questions that I will get answers for and read into the podcast. So let me just end with as much as you can say in 90 seconds about Horizon and where it's at and what we should expect time-wise.
Yeah, great. So Horizon, our program is going really, really well. We're now in our third IDE, or investigative device exemption study, and that's about 120, 125 patients studied now, all the way down to age 2. And our algorithm has performed very well, been very safe during day and night in adults, adolescents, pediatrics. And we've had studies looking at it from 36 hours to in kind of more controlled clinical environments, all the way through to kind of free living conditions in a hotel. Mm-hmm. We've had a terrific time in range, up to 85% in time in range, and less than 2% of hypoglycemia. So really, as good as it gets in terms of these early studies of these programs. And we are really excited about getting this one to market, forecasting kind of sometime in the late 2019, early 2020 timeframe.
Is the goal to be able to set a user-defined blood sugar goal?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we will have multiple flexible set points so that you're not sort of limited as you are in some of the current systems.
Okay, go tell the board you were doing the Juicebox podcast. I'm sure they'll understand.
I think they will.
Tell them to get out their phones and subscribe.
It's great to talk to you.
You too, Shacey. Take care. Go ahead and run. Thanks.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Hey, I have a few things to say, but after that, there were a couple of your questions that Shacey and I didn't have time to get to. So I'll address them right after this. Huge thank you to Shacey and Omnipod for sponsoring the podcast, and to Dexcom for also sponsoring. If you were just here today to find out more about Omnipod, I hope you stick around and try some other episodes. There are about a bazillion ways to listen to the Juicebox podcast. Sure, you can listen at juiceboxpodcast.com, but it is so much easier to listen on your phone, Apple or Android phone, doesn't matter which one. Let me just tell you a couple of the ways that people listen. Through iTunes. That's not great because you got to be sitting at your desk. But if you're at your desk, not bad. Apple users, there's a podcast app on your phone called Podcasts. If you don't like that one, there's about a bazillion others. Let me tell you some of the ways that people listen. Pocket Cast, Podcast Addict, Castbox, iHeartRadio, Downcast, Player FM, Stage Fright, Podbean, Spotify, Breaker, Castro. Some of you listen at Google Play Music, Stitcher, iCatcher. There's more. Echo, AntennaPod, Podkicker, Podkicker Pro. Some of you are even streaming it through the VLC. People are listening all different kinds of ways. Through QuickTime. Who's listening through QuickTime? Get yourself a podcast app on your phone if you're listening through QuickTime. Let me go on and take a minute to thank everyone for listening. Not only are there listeners in the United States and Canada, you are listening in Brazil, Argentina, Peru, Colombia, South Africa, Morocco, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Yemen. Where else? Iraq, Turkey, France, Spain, United Kingdom, Ireland, Germany, Poland, Norway, Sweden, Russia, Kazakhstan. Who is listening in Kazakhstan? What's up, Kazakhstan? China, India, Pakistan, Australia, Indonesia, New Zealand, Japan, and South Korea. Seriously, thank you all for listening and for sharing the Juicebox podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Shacey. I hope you give an Omnipod a try. I hope you give Dexcom a try. But I want to thank you for giving the Juicebox podcast a try. I saw firsthand this week, like I talked about back in the Dexcom ad, I saw firsthand what it must be like for you to listen to the show. I saw that in person, and I am more motivated than ever to keep this podcast going. And now, the questions we didn't have time to get to. The first question I wasn't able to get to was about applying for clinical trials with Omnipod. I've put the instructions for that in the show notes of your podcast player, and if for some reason you use one of the apps that is funky with show notes, you can go to juiceboxpodcast.com, find this episode. It is episode 154, and the information will be there also. The next question was about beeping on the pod. So, for instance, you put on a new pod, and it reminds you, I think it's 2 hours later, that you've put on a new pod. That is a safety feature that the FDA requires. Why can't you silence it without the PDM? Interestingly enough, Omnipod did tell me that at one point they thought to build that functionality into the pod, like you could tap the pod to stop the beeping, but it was a cost-prohibitive idea to add something to the pod that could register a tap. The shorter answer is that the Omnipod tubeless insulin pump has moments where it tells you to pay attention to the fact that you're wearing an insulin pump. This is FDA required. One of those times is, for instance, after a pod change. Also for hazard alarms like occlusions, low reservoir, or an expiring pod. The FDA thinks, and frankly, I agree, that there are times when you have to be reminded that you're wearing an insulin pump. Those that I just listed are great examples. In the end, you can't, as a user, decide that you don't want those alarms. You can on some pumps, but on those pumps, remember, you are tethered to the pump, so the pump is always with you. With an Omnipod, you might put on a new pump in your kitchen and then go outside in your backyard for 3 hours. You just don't want to not be getting insulin and not know it. And there are some times when your attention needs to be drawn back around. You're busy. Listen, here it is. The Omnipod is so good at helping you to forget that you have type 1 diabetes. Sometimes it has to remind you.